Before we start, do this one thing for me. Take a breath. Look around you. Maybe you're lying in bed. Maybe the room is dim. Maybe there's a sound machine humming in the distance. Or a cat curled like a secret beside you. Now ask yourself, have you ever truly considered what came before? Before the roll, before the quilted sheets, before the two-ply security of your modern throne? What came before the paper? And what happened to the ones who lived without it? If you like this kind of question these uncomfortable, slow-burning stories of the body and the past give the video a like, and subscribe for more. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what strange topic you'd like us to explore next. Now, back to your regular programming. An uncomfortable journey through history, via the least dignified route possible. Let's begin. You crouch in the brush. Not because you want to, because there's no other option. Your stomach turned an hour ago. Now it coils and churns like a dying eel. You squat. You pray. And you finish. The moment ends. But another moment begins. The after. And the question you've been dreading surfaces like a dead carp. Now what? There's no paper. Of course not. It's the 8th century BCE. You're a peasant. In northern China, and you've just used the same communal trail that half the village shares. The leaves around you are too brittle. Your tunic sleeve is already crusted from a mistake last week. And water? Ha! You live by the river. You don't touch it. Not unless you want to catch something that makes your current misery look like a blessing. So, you look down at your hands. Your fate. The oldest decision every human has made, across every culture. What do I use? Your eyes find a flat stone, too jagged. A stick, too thin. And then bark. Not too sharp, not too soft. Just dry enough to be effective. Just coarse enough to remind you what you've done. You hesitate. You wipe. And the pain sings up your spine like a monk's bell. It's done. You throw the bark aside. You walk back. But your skin? Your soul? They remember. This is how it begins. Not just your day, but history. Because before toilet paper, there was bark, moss, wool, sticks, pottery shards, salt water, sand, corn cobs, sea sponges, and sometimes nothing at all. Every civilization made their choice. Every choice left a mark. On skin, on language, on shame. And tonight, you'll follow all of them. Through time, through filth, through embarrassment. Welcome to the untold history of wiping. Your hands shake when you return to camp. The elder eyes you suspiciously. He's seen that look before. He knows. No one speaks. But your posture is enough. You carry your guilt between your legs. The bark lies somewhere in the woods, half buried in moss, steaming faintly, a monument to your passage. You'll dream about it tonight. The scrape, the sting, the realization that cleanliness is a luxury built on invention. That evening, the healer approaches you. She offers a salve made from crushed mint and pig tallow. You wince as she applies it. She says nothing, but her eyes are kind. She remembers her first bark, and the second, and the infection that came after. You thank her. You promise to be more careful. She laughs. There is no careful. There is only adaptation. You don't understand then, but you will. You sleep poorly. Every toss and turn grates the rawness like flint on bone. You wake early. You limp to the river. not to bathe, just to see it. It glimmers, untouched, holy. You dip a hand in. The chill rushes up your arm, but you don't drink. Not yet. Not after what the others told you. Parasites. Worms. Things that crawl where the bark already bruised. You stare at your reflection. You look older. Not in the face. In the eyes. The kind of age that comes from knowing you'll have to do it all again. Soon. Because digestion is constant. And so is waste. You aren't a person anymore. You're a vessel. For food. For bacteria. For discomfort. And the world has yet to invent kindness for your condition. Only improvisation. That night you sit by the fire. The elders speak of trade routes. Of new cloths from the west. Thin linen. Soft as clouds. Too expensive for your class. But you dream of it. A cloth you'd never throw away. Something sacred. Reused. Rinsed. Dried on a sun-warmed rock. You know it's not likely. But your skin aches with hope. Before sleep, you check your satchel. Inside, 3 folded pieces of bark. Selected carefully. One from willow. One from oak. One from the soft underbelly of a fallen birch. You'll try them. Experiment. Compare. Not because you want to, but because survival is trial and error. And you are learning. That's where it starts. Not with silk. Not with perforation. Not with brands or bears or roll dispensers. It starts here, in the dark, in the woods, in the desperation of a body too human for dignity. And the bark you didn't choose? It remembers you, even now, even as you sleep. It was smooth, too smooth. That was your first mistake. You thought it meant kindness. That polished, equaled, gentle. But stones don't care about you. Not then. Not now. Not ever. The bark had run out. After 3 days, the stash in your satchel was damp with regret. Too wet to use. Too old to risk. So you did what any human has always done when caught in that silent, squatting panic. You adapted. You looked for something flat. Solid. Stable. You found it beneath the lip of a half-rotted log. A stone. Rounded. River-worn. Almost inviting. You thought, this is the one. You were wrong. Let's not sugarcoat it. It didn't slice. It sanded. And not evenly. One pass too shallow, the next far too deep. You hissed. You clenched. You cursed in a tongue you didn't know you spoke. The stone scraped, then slipped. It left behind a line you would remember for the rest of your life. Not because of the pain. Because of what came after. You limped back to the camp like a man hiding a dagger between his cheeks. You couldn't sit, could barely breathe, but no one asked, because they saw the stone in your hand, and they knew. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. Later, by the fire, the elder leaned toward you, offered you a cloth pouch. Inside, a flat disk of pumice, darker than soot, lighter than blood. He said, use this next time. It doesn't bite back. You thanked him, and then he said something stranger, something that settled into your spine like damp. Don't use too much, the stone remembers. You laughed. He didn't. That night, you dreamt of the trench. Again, only this time, it was paved with stones. Each one stamped with a name. Yours was near the front. Fresh. Still warm. You woke cold and sweating. You didn't sleep again. The next morning, you asked the elder what he meant. He stirred the fire. Didn't look up. When you use something often enough, it knows you. You waited. He added, and sometimes it follows. You checked your satchel that night. The pumice was still there, dry, warm, waiting. Word reached you 2 days later. Merchants from the south were arriving. They came with spices, salt, and cloth. You perked up, not just for trade, for hope. You'd heard rumors of soft linen strips, reusable, washable, private. You dreamed of it the night before they arrived, of silk across skin, of softness that didn't burn, of a wipe that didn't scar. The merchants were gaunt, tired, but clean. Too clean. One of them noticed your limp, asked if you'd sat on a spear. You smiled tightly. He didn't laugh. Instead, he handed you a parcel, wrapped in waxed skin. You opened it slowly. Inside, folded cloth, pale blue, fringed edges, soft as breath. You nearly wept. "How much?" you asked. He looked you over, then pointed to your knife, a family heirloom. You hesitated, then gave it. Because your backside was worth more than your bloodline. He grinned. "Wise trade." You nodded, tucked the cloth into your belt like a holy relic, and promised yourself you'd use it only when absolutely necessary. You lasted 6 hours. The need came suddenly, painfully, but this time, when it ended, you reached for the cloth, unfolded it, held it in both hands like an apology. You wiped, and it was divine. No sting, no scrape, just peace. You folded it carefully, rinsed it in the river, despite the warnings, then dried it in the sun, turning it every 15 minutes like a precious fruit. You used it again the next day, and the next. Each time, you cleaned it with obsessive care, but on the 4th day, it vanished. You searched everywhere. Nothing. You asked. No answers. Until a boy whispered, "Check the elder's tent." You did, and there it was, hanging from a line, still damp, still yours. You asked him why. He didn't lie. Because you forgot. The stone remembers, but cloth forgives nothing. You didn't understand, until you tried to use it again, and it tore. Not much, just a corner, but it bled color and smell. The stain didn't come out. No matter how long you scrubbed, the cloth had absorbed something more than filth. It had changed, and it wouldn't forget. That night, you returned the pumice, not because you wanted to, because you had no choice. It greeted you like an old enemy, cold, unforgiving, predictable. You winced. You bled. You survived. This was your cycle now. Stone, hope, cloth, loss. Stone again. Each wipe a ritual. Each choice a gamble. You weren't cleaning anymore. You were negotiating. With your body. With your past. With the materials the world allowed you. And they were all hungry for something. No one told you this part of history. That sanitation isn't about cleanliness. It's about pain management. And memory. Because everything you use remembers you. And one day, you'll remember it back. They called it the tersorium, but you wouldn't know that yet. You don't speak Latin. You don't even know Rome exists. All you know is that someone handed you a stick. And at the end of that stick, a sponge. Gray, pitted, wet. You were told to use it, and more importantly, to put it back. The bathhouse wasn't a luxury. It was an obligation. You lived in the slums of a Roman garrison city, where sweat was currency and excrement had a scent hierarchy of its own. The toilets were public, rows of them, smooth stone benches, circular holes, no privacy, only shame, and the sponge. You waited your turn like everyone else, standing in a line of tired, barely clothed bodies. You tried not to breathe too deep, tried not to look down. The sounds were worse than the smells. Groans, splashes, muffled apologies. You stepped forward when it was time. You sat. You did what had to be done. And then you reached for the stick. It lived in a bucket, soaking in vinegar water. Or maybe just old urine no one knew anymore. It smelled like surrender. You lifted it slowly. It dripped down your arm. You didn't flinch. You couldn't afford to. You did what they taught you. Wipe in one direction. Rinse. Repeat. Pray nothing seeps back in. It worked. Kind of. If you didn't think about it too hard. If you didn't think about the last dozen people who used it. Or the 100 before that. Or the fact that it was only changed once a week. If that, when you returned the sponge, you met the gaze of the man waiting behind you. He nodded. Not in respect. In pity. Because now he had to use it too. And tomorrow, he might be the one who bleeds from it. Or the one who gets sick. Or the one who screams when the salt in the vinegar finds a new opening in his skin. That night, you dreamed of the sponge. It followed you through the forum. It whispered from alleyways. It dangled from temple doors. You tried to run, but it dripped after you, like a leash or a tongue. You woke gagging, but you used it again and again, because what choice did you have? There were no leaves in the city, no moss. Stones were forbidden too many cracked bowls and infections. And cloth? That was for senators, not the likes of you. One day, you saw a man bring his own, a fresh sponge, bound to a smooth stick. He used it, washed it with wine, and took it with him. He walked like a god among filth. You asked him how he afforded it. He shrugged. I don't drink. You considered the idea. Sobriety for sanitation. It sounded noble, until you realized how many hours you worked just to afford cheap wine. So you kept using the shared one, because you still needed to forget. The infection came without warning. Just a small itch at first. Then burning. Then bleeding. You hid it as long as you could, until the healer found the stain on your tunic. She nodded. Didn't judge. Just gave you a mixture of honey, myrrh, and hopelessness. You applied it, you screamed. But it helped. A little. She asked how long you'd been using the public sponge. You said, forever. She winced and told you a story of an old man who refused to use it. He wiped with sand every day, cut himself often, but never got sick. He died clean and alone. You asked if it was worth it. She didn't answer, just turned back to her work. One afternoon, the bucket was empty. No sponge, no vinegar, nothing. People muttered. Panicked. Someone suggested cloth. Someone else laughed. You said nothing. Then a boy came running. He had taken the sponge home. To clean it, he said. He meant well, but it was gone now. Stolen, thrown away, or eaten by a dog. The line behind you grew restless. Someone pointed at you. You were the next in line. No sponge. No stick. Just a hole and expectations. You swallowed your pride and used your hand, rinsed it in the trough. Twice, 3 times, scrubbed it with sand from the street. You didn't look anyone in the eye. They didn't look at you. The next day, the bucket had 2 sponges. Someone had made another. The old one returned. Smelled like olives now. No one questioned it. They just used them. Again and again. You started dreaming of cloth, of softness, of privacy, of a moment in history that hadn't arrived yet. You imagined a world with choices, with wrappers, rolls, perforation. But when you woke, the sponge waited, dripping, patient, faithful, like a wet dog that didn't know it was unloved. And you never bought your own, because you knew the truth, that once you had a sponge to yourself, you'd never be able to go back. And people like you always go back, because that's what history is made of. People who never really had a choice, just a stick. And the sponge they didn't share. They didn't tell you it would be rough. They handed it to you with a smile, as if it were a gift, as if they were doing you a kindness. No warning, no context, just a hand extended, and in it a dried corn cob, smooth at the top, jagged at the bottom, streaked with something old. You blinked, and they nodded. This'll do just fine. You were in the fields then, not a peasant, not a slave, just a boy working on a Midwestern farm before plumbing reached the rural map. The outhouse was your only escape. A leaning shack at the edge of the property, held up by ivy in denial. Inside, a wooden seat, a buzzing of flies, and a box. No paper, no rags, just a pile of dried corn cobs. Used, reused, sometimes marked, sometimes not. Your first time, you didn't ask. You didn't need to. You watched your uncle go in. He came out 5 minutes later and threw a cob into the bushes. You heard it land with a wet sound. You waited for it to stop steaming. Then you went in, and the smell hit you like a slap. Ammonia, earth, sweet rot. You sat, and you understood something primal. That nature didn't ask permission. It expected cleanup. You reached for a cob. It was dry, stiff, almost light. You turned it in your hand. It had ridges, edges. You hesitated, but the alternative was worse. So you wiped. It wasn't pain. Not exactly. More like resistance. Like your body saying, "No, no, no," and the world saying, "Yes, yes, yes." It worked, mostly. But when you stood, you felt it. The sting, the after rub, the reminder. And you knew it wasn't over. Not for your skin, not for your dignity, not for the cob. Because now you had a choice. Throw it out? Rinse it? Return it to the box? You froze. Then you did what they all did. You placed it carefully in the used pile, like setting down an heirloom, and you told yourself you'd never touch it again. But part of you knew. You might. Later, at dinner, someone asked, "How'd your first cob go?" Everyone laughed. You didn't. Your uncle slapped your back. Don't worry, your butt'll get used to it. Just don't grab the mildewy ones. You almost dropped your spoon, because now you had to learn how to inspect them, like produce, like medicine, like war tools. The days passed. You got better, learned which cobs still had a softness to them, which ones cracked wrong, which ones made you bleed. You developed a system, 2 cobs per visit, 1 for the first pass, 1 for the polish. You rinsed when you could, laid them out in the sun to dry, lined them up like soldiers. No one thanked you, but they noticed. You began to take pride in it, in the system, in the order, in the smoothness of the experience. You joked less, cleaned more. You even tried carving initials into your preferred cobs, until someone used yours by mistake, and you couldn't look them in the eye for 3 weeks. Winter was the worst. The cobs froze. They stuck, cracked, splintered. You had to warm them in your hands before use. Sometimes you gave up, used snow, regretted it immediately. But what choice did you have? The outhouse didn't forgive weakness. It smelled it, and it made you pay. One night, you got sick. The kind that hits low and fast. You barely made it out the door. You didn't have time to choose your cobs. You grabbed the top one, ran, dropped your trousers before you sat. And when you wiped, you felt it. A crack, a sharpness, then blood. You howled. No one came. They were used to the sounds. In the morning, your mother saw the stain on your clothes, said nothing, just pressed a jar of lard into your hand, and looked away. You understood. This was the real inheritance. Not the land, not the tools, the cobs, and the wounds they left behind. Eventually, someone brought a newspaper. Not for reading, for use. They tried a page. It shredded. Too thin, too dry. Another page. Better. Soon, the box had both. Cobs on one side, newspaper scraps on the other. But the paper ran out fast. People hoarded it, hid it, tore off coupons, and left headlines, until the only paper left read, "And near, say officials." You folded it carefully and wiped. It felt hopeful. Years passed. Indoor plumbing came, and with it toilet paper, rolls, softness, perfume, perforation. You cried the first time you used it, not because it worked, but because it didn't judge. It didn't scrape. It didn't remember you. It just did the job and disappeared. But even now, sometimes, in dreams, you feel the weight of the cob in your hand. You hear it whisper. You see the box. And you wake up thankful for every square you've ever wasted. Because you know the truth. The paper is a privilege. But the cob? The cob was a teacher. And it never let you forget that even in your most private moments, history was always watching. And sometimes, it had kernels. It was the softest thing you'd ever touched. Not in a romantic way. Not in the way poets describe a lover's skin. No, this was suspiciously soft. Soft with intention. Soft with warning. You knew it didn't belong in your hands. Not just because of the texture, but because of the history. Silk wasn't made for you. It was made for people who'd never had to crouch over a trench and ask themselves what leaf was least poisonous. And yet, here it was. It came in a chest, carried by a merchant with gold teeth and dry lips. He didn't speak your language, but he knew the weight of envy. He placed it on the table like a secret. When they opened the lid, everyone gasped. Even the elder, even the healer who'd seen worse things than silk could ever fix. Inside, rolled lengths of fabric, silk, cream-colored, thin as cloud breath. You stepped closer. You shouldn't have. He gestured, said something in a thick tongue, then pointed at your shoes. Old leather, cracked. You knew what he meant. A trade. You looked down. Your last good pair, but your hands still hurt from the bark. Your thigh still bore a line from the pumice. You took off your shoes and gave them up. The merchant laughed. Cut a square of silk. Not large, not even practical, but it was yours now. You held it up. The others stared. Not with admiration, with fear, because this was luxury, and luxury in your world always came with a curse. You didn't use it right away. You couldn't. You kept it folded under your sleeping mat, wrapped in bark, protected from the air. But every night, you imagined it. That final moment, after the relief, when the horror sets in, and instead of reaching for wood or sponge or shame, you'd reach for grace. The day came sooner than expected. A feast. Too much meat. Too little water. Your stomach twisted by nightfall. And in the dark, behind the hut, it happened. Quick. Violent. Inevitable. And when it was done, you reached into your tunic, unwrapped the silk. It fluttered in your hand, like it was trying to escape. You steadied it. You used it. Slow, gentle, savoring. There was no sting, no fibers, no scraping, just warmth and absence, as if your body didn't register it at all. You wept, not from relief, from guilt, because nothing should feel this kind in such a moment, not to someone like you. You tried to clean it, but the stain spread too fast, soaked through, changed the fabric. It became stiff, lost its shine. The wind didn't pass through it anymore. It sagged, like it knew what had happened, like it resented you. You tried vinegar, milk, ash. Nothing restored it. And when you laid it out to dry, even the flies avoided it. You knew what came next. You couldn't keep it. Not as it was. Not without shame. So you burned it, quietly, behind the smokehouse. Wrapped it in leaves and let it go. It didn't even smoke much. Just curled into itself and vanished. Like silk never meant to touch someone like you. You told no one, but the healer noticed the change in your walk. She asked. You lied. Said you slipped in the river. She gave you a poultice anyway. Didn't press further, but her eyes lingered longer than usual. She knew. Days passed. The same as before. Back to bark. Back to stone. Back to fear. But you never forgot the silk, and you never forgave yourself for using it, because it wasn't just a mistake. It was a revelation of how far the body can fall, of how little it takes to make a human feel royal, and how quickly that royalty dissolves into filth. You met the merchant again a year later. He didn't recognize you, but you recognized the box. This time, it held something different. Rags. Rough. Practical. For cleaning horses, he mimed. But you knew better. You bought one. Used it the next week. It hurt. A lot. But it didn't shame you. That mattered more. Someone once said that silk was made by worms, that it came from their bodies, drawn out in endless threads. You thought about that often, that even a worm's last offering could be twisted into elegance. But in your hands, it only reminded you that even the finest things in the world can be soiled, irreparably, You never used silk again, even when you had the chance, even when they brought better versions. Bleached, washed, wrapped in herbs. You smiled. You nodded. But you declined, because you remembered what it felt like. Not just on your skin, but in your bones. Too soft, too perfect, too impossible. You stuck with bark. Because bark didn't lie to you. Bark didn't seduce. Bark hurt. But at least it was honest. And in a world where your most intimate moments were shared with insects and wind, honesty was the most you could ask for. So, when people speak of silk now, they think of dresses, of banners, of emperors. But you think of midnight, and meat, and a burn that didn't come from fire. You think of a square of softness that you didn't deserve, and never will again. It looked clear. That was the first lie. Because clarity in your world didn't mean clean. It meant danger you couldn't see. You stood at the edge of the stream, watching it swirl between rocks like it had something to prove. Behind you, the latrine was full again. Overfull. Bubbling with a truth no one wanted to admit. So they told you, use the stream. They always said it like it was a favor. Like you were lucky. But you weren't lucky. You were just next. There was no sponge this time. No cloth. No bark. Just water. Cold. Fast. Unapologetic. You crouched low. Checked for leeches. Pretended the ripples were gentle. Then you reached down and did what survival demanded. It was quick. Mechanical. You didn't think about technique anymore. Just efficiency. Speed. Escape. Because every second your skin was in that water, you were gambling with history. With infection. With leprosy. With parasites you couldn't pronounce. But when you stood, you were clean. Kind of. Enough. For now, you rinsed your hands. Scrubbed them with pebbles. Then with sand. You stood in the sun until you stopped shivering. Then walked back to the camp, pretending your skin didn't itch already. That night, the healer boiled water by the fire. Not for you. For another boy. You watched him twist on the ground, groaning. Eyes sunken. Lips cracked. They whispered the name of his sickness like it was a prayer. Giardia. You didn't know what it meant. Just that it came from water. Just that it waited. And followed. You started carrying a pouch of ashes. Mixed it with water before rinsing. It helped. Maybe. Or maybe it just burned enough to feel like something was happening. Sometimes you used urine instead. Warm. Reliable. Your own. It was disgusting. It was honest. One morning, you found the stream clogged. Upstream, a pig had fallen in, dead for days. Bloated, bobbing against the rocks like it belonged there. The smell reached you before the sight. You screamed. Someone laughed. Then vomited. No one fetched the pig. No one dared. They just walked farther up to rinse, as if water could forget its own memory. You didn't bathe that week. You didn't wipe properly either. You tried leaves again. They crumbled. Tried dry grass. It stuck. Tried nothing. That was the worst. By day 5, your skin flared. Not red. Not rash. But hot. Alive. The kind of alive that means death is already knocking. You couldn't sit. You couldn't walk straight. The healer noticed. She said nothing. Just pointed to the fire. Handed you a bundle of herbs. Then whispered, Next time, dig a hole. You nodded. Didn't ask what she meant. Because you knew. You started digging. Every day. Small trenches. Behind rocks. Under trees. Where no one would walk or smell or notice. You wiped with mud. With roots. With shame. But you didn't trust the water anymore. Not like before. They brought a bucket down from the hills. Rainwater. They said it was safer. It wasn't. It just looked different. Tasted of sky. Smelled like tin. You tried it once. Wiped. Rinsed. Got dizzy the next morning. Sat under a tree for hours, sweating. Tried to cry, but your eyes were dry. Like your body had run out of liquids it could trust. Eventually, the river healed. Or you just stopped noticing. The pig vanished. The rocks shone again. Kids played near the banks. Splashed each other. Dared each other to drink. You sat far away, wiping with bark again. Too tired to warn them. Too tired to care. Because that's what happens when water betrays you. You stop believing in kindness. Someone brought cloth later. Brown. Torn. From a dead man's tunic. They offered it like a blessing. You took it like a curse. Used it once. Burned it after. It left threads behind. Too thin. Too needy. You preferred the stream's cruelty. At least it was consistent. They called you paranoid. Said you were obsessed. You didn't argue. You just watched them wipe. And counted the days before the fever came. It always did. They called it bad luck. You called it history. There were rumors, of course. Of lands where people wiped with paper. Clean, white, folded. Used once. Flushed away. You laughed when you heard it. Not because it was funny, but because it sounded like magic. And magic always came with a price. You dreamed of it one night. A roll. Infinite. Warm. You wiped, and it hummed. Then wrapped around you. Coiled. Tightened. Whispered in your ear, "You don't deserve this." You woke, screaming, and wiped with moss, just to make sure you were real. Years later, you passed that stream again. It looked clear, still dangerous, but you nodded to it, like an old enemy. A truce. Maybe. It didn't splash back, didn't greet you, didn't offer forgiveness, just kept flowing, like it didn't remember you. But you remembered it, because even when it's clean, water holds everything, and sometimes it lets go just long enough to lure you back in. You never cared about the news. It was always late by the time it reached you. Old words, older lies. But when the roll ran out, when the sponge was gone, when even the bark had vanished into the cold wind, you started caring. Because now the newspaper mattered in ways it never intended. It began with your neighbor. He worked in the post office, what passed for one anyway, and he had stacks, yellowed bundles of unsold issues, wrinkled columns, black and white portraits of men who smiled too confidently. At first, he burned them, used them for kindling, for wrapping meat, for stuffing shoes. Then someone suggested something else. Wiping. He laughed. Until he tried it. Then he stopped laughing. The paper didn't tear like leaves. It didn't crumble like moss. It had weight. Ink rubbed off, sure. Your thighs sometimes bore headlines. But it worked. It was paper. And it wasn't alive. That was enough. Word spread. Soon, half the village was knocking at his door, trading eggs for pages, offering labor for letters. Even children brought baskets of herbs, hoping to barter for just a few strips of Sunday opinion columns. You stood in line with them. No shame. Not anymore, because pride meant nothing when you were out of options. He gave you the sports section first. Didn't ask why. Didn't make eye contact. Just folded it carefully and handed it to you like a priest offering a blessing. You took it, held it like treasure, and you didn't read a single word. That night, you tested it. One sheet, folded twice, held firm. You crouched behind the fence where the grass grew tall and forgetful. You wiped, and for a moment, you thought you heard the faint echo of a radio announcer calling out the game. You smiled, even chuckled, then wiped again, and remembered why newspapers were printed on cheap pulp. The ink smudged, the paper scratched, but it was better than the corn cob, better than the frostbitten sponge, better than your hand. You developed a system, 2 sheets per visit, one for the mess, one for the polish, as your uncle called it. You folded them, just so. Used the classifieds first. No one wanted to risk wiping with obituaries. Sometimes you caught glimpses of headlines. Victory declared. President speaks on peace. Unemployment hits record. None of it made sense to you. You weren't part of that world. But now, it touched you in the most literal way. Kids started swapping pages like currency. One boy offered his comic strip for 2 slices of bread. Another stole a political cartoon and was beaten for it. You overheard a girl ask her grandmother, "Did people really used to read this stuff?" The old woman just sighed and reached for the crossword. You tried reading once, before wiping, just to feel civilized, but every sentence reminded you what came next. You couldn't focus, couldn't care. The words felt like lies even before they were smeared away. So you stopped. Rain ruined everything. One storm drowned half the stack. Pages bled together, turned to sludge. People cried, not for the news, but for the loss of supply. The smell of wet ink haunted you for days. It clung to your nails, your clothes, your shame. You tried drying some in the oven. They curled, brittled, crumpled. Still, they wiped. Rougher now, but usable, barely. The man at the post office started charging. First, a penny, then 2, then 3 in a favor. You hated him, but you needed him, so you smiled, paid, took your folded dignity home in a cloth pouch, and prayed it didn't rain. 1 week, he ran out. No papers, no shipments, no explanations. You waited. You begged. You offered your coat. He shook his head. Gone. So you rationed, used 1 sheet over multiple days, turned it, folded it, avoided corners already used, and when it tore, you wiped with your fingers, then with your breath, then with nothing. Desperation came quietly. You started visiting garbage heaps, digging through ash piles, looking for scraps, a corner of weather, a smudge of stocks. You found a society column once, a wedding announcement. Someone named Ethel married a man named Walter. You used them both, without invitation, and then it arrived. A full Sunday edition, from the city, late but complete. 12 glorious pages, thick, crisp. You wept. You held it to your face. It smelled like salvation. You didn't even wait. You wiped with the editorial first, felt like a king, then folded the comics and saved them for a bad day. Years later, toilet paper became real. Not a dream, not a whisper, but a product. White, soft, spun into perfect rolls. You tried it once. It was foreign, too gentle, too forgiving. You missed the scratch, the ink, the feel of yesterday's propaganda smoothing over today's indignity. You framed a piece of newsprint once, hung it above your sink. It read, "Peace declared, world celebrates." You didn't celebrate. You remembered the headline that followed. Page 2 missing. You smiled, because you had wiped with page 2, and peace had never felt so useful, because in the end, history isn't what you read. It's what you used, and sometimes the truth isn't printed in bold. It's folded, stained, and flushed into forgetting, just like everything else. It looked harmless, a shade of green that whispered innocence, broad, flat, slightly soft to the touch. You plucked it without thinking, because when nature calls, you don't wait for introductions. But the moment it touched you, you knew you'd made a mistake. It didn't burn right away. No, that would have been merciful. It started as a tingle, a suggestion, then a creeping itch, not just on the surface, but in your soul. You dropped the leaf, too late. You'd wiped. And now you were marked. No one told you what it was. They never warned you. They just said, "Don't grab the shiny ones." That was it. As if shiny was a scientific classification. As if you had time to study flora while squatting behind a bush with your trousers at your ankles. The next hour was a descent. Your walk turned stiff. Your breath caught. You tried scratching discreetly. Against bark. Against your sleeve. Against shame. It didn't help. The burn spread like gossip. Every step felt like a betrayal. Every breeze, a fresh insult. You regretted being born. By the time you returned to camp, your gait had changed. You walked wide, like a man riding an invisible horse. Someone noticed. They asked. You mumbled. They laughed, then offered you vinegar. And a lesson. Poison ivy, they said. Or maybe oak. Or sumac. Nobody really knew. They just called it the leaf. Capital L. Because it didn't matter what it was. What mattered was what it did. And it did plenty. You spent the night in agony. Not fire. Not pain. Something worse. Awareness. Every nerve pulsing. Every second reminding you what you did wrong. The healer gave you a paste. It smelled like feet and regret. You applied it anyway, because your options were few and dignity was already dead. By morning, the rash had bloomed. Angry, red ridges. Swollen welts. The healer winced. Said nothing. Just added another herb. You didn't ask what it was. You didn't care. You just wanted to sit again someday. That week, they taught you leaf lore. Which to trust. Which to fear. They made you touch them. Rub them against your forearm. Wait for reactions. It felt like punishment. Like homework for crimes you didn't mean to commit. You learned slow. One mistake at a time. There was a leaf that crumbled too fast. One that held on to moisture like a curse. One that stank worse than what you were wiping off. Each had a personality, and all of them hated you. Eventually, you found your favorite. A wide, soft leaf with a fuzzy underside. Gentle, loyal. You named it, carried samples in a pouch, offered them to friends like gifts. They laughed, until they tried it. Then they begged. But nature isn't infinite, and winter came. Your plant died, buried in frost and forgetting. You searched, found stiff, brittle imitations. They cracked in your hand, shattered on contact. You bled, a lot, and you wept, a little. The healer made you a salve, mud and sap and maybe hope. You used it sparingly, because your skin no longer trusted kindness. Spring returned, with new leaves. You were cautious, tested each like a scientist, sniffed, rubbed again. You grew picky, snobbish. You turned down leaves others swore by, because once you've been betrayed, you don't forget. One day, a traveler passed through, carried rolls of cloth in his pack, soft, patterned. He offered one. You asked what it was. He smiled. "Toilet paper," he said. You squinted. "What's it for?" He laughed. Didn't answer. Just handed it over. You took it like a blessing, and used it that night. It tore, left strands, clung in places it shouldn't. You cursed. You burned it, and went back to leaves. Because at least they belonged here. At least they grew where you suffered. At least they didn't lie. Years passed. You became the leaf teacher. Children gathered around you. You pointed, named, explained. You warned about the shiny ones, showed scars. They listened, because you were living proof that nature keeps score. And when someone new joined the village, too proud to ask, too fast to wait, you watched them walk funny the next day, and you smiled, not out of cruelty, but out of kinship, because pain is the oldest teacher, and leaves never forget a face. It wasn't beautiful, not really, not the kind of shell you'd put on a necklace, or whisper wishes into at the beach. No, it was chipped, cracked near the edge, smelled faintly of fish and something else. But it was smooth in just the right way. And in your world, that was enough. It came from a traveler, a wiry man with sun-blasted skin and a sack of wonders. He had ivory dice, tin charms, a flute that didn't play, and, nestled among the junk, a pile of seashells, big ones, palm-sized, curved like a cup. You picked one up, ran your thumb along the inside. It shone faintly, even in the dust. "That one's been used," he said. You paused. "Used for what?" He grinned. Didn't answer. Just took your coin and walked away. You didn't know why you bought it. Maybe you were desperate. Maybe you liked how it felt. Hard outside, soft within. Maybe it reminded you of things that never hurt, which, in your life, were few. You didn't use it right away. You kept it on a shelf, next to old rags and dried leaves. Every so often, you'd hold it, feel its weight, its potential, and imagine what it might feel like to wipe with something ancient, something that once lived in the ocean. That knew salt and silence. The day you used it, nothing special happened. You just ran out of options. The bark was gone, the paper soaked, the sponge stiff as wood, and the itch was growing again. So you took the shell, stepped behind the hut, and crouched. It surprised you, cold at first, then almost graceful. It scooped, not wiped, not scrubbed. It lifted the shame, curved with your shape like it had been designed for this. For you. You didn't expect to sigh, but you did. It didn't cut, didn't scratch. The edge was just dull enough. You cleaned it in the stream, watched the water ripple around it, then placed it on a rock to dry. It gleamed, smugly. The next time came faster. No hesitation now. You reached for the shell like an old friend, a partner, a tool. It delivered, again and again. You even started giving it a name in your head. Didn't say it aloud. That would have been weird. But in your thoughts, you thanked it. Every time. Then it chipped. A little fracture on the rim. You didn't notice until it was too late. A scratch. Tiny. Precise. Cruel. You bled. Just a bit. But in that moment, you remembered what it was. A corpse. The hollowed-out body of something long dead. And now it held you. You didn't use it for days after that. Let it sit. Thought about burying it. But each time the cold leaves scraped your skin. Each time the stone stung deeper than dignity. You looked back at the shell, and eventually you forgave it. You filed the edge with a rock, polished it smooth again, tried not to think about what else the shell had touched, where it had been, who it used to be, because none of that mattered now. It was yours, and it worked. Others saw you with it, asked questions. You lied, said it was ceremonial, said it was for scooping grain. One boy laughed, tried to steal it. You slapped him. Hard. The camp stared. He didn't try again. You made a pouch for it, wrapped it in cloth, kept it close. Even wore it under your shirt when traveling. Not because it was sacred, but because it was essential, because you feared waking one day and having to choose between moss and misery again. Once, you dropped it. It landed in the latrine, a horrible splash. You stood over the pit for minutes, breathing through your mouth, weighing pride against practicality. You climbed in, fished it out, washed it until your hands bled, boiled it, scrubbed it, forgave it. Again, it grew familiar, comforting, even when it cracked further, even when time made it brittle. You refused to replace it, refused to look for another. Because this one knew you. It had history, and in a world where everything else was borrowed or broken, this shell had chosen to stay. When someone brought back a new roll of parchment, white and soft and sterile, you declined. They mocked you, waved it in your face. You smiled, patted your pouch, and walked away. Because they didn't know. They hadn't bled. They hadn't learned what you had learned. That sometimes the best things in life were once alive, and now were just useful. It fell quietly. No warning. No thunder. Just a slow, steady drift that turned the world to silence. You didn't notice at first. Too busy breaking bark, boiling scraps of cloth, rationing the last of the newspaper. But when you woke and stepped outside, you saw it, blanketing everything in soft, white forgiveness. Snow, they said. Beautiful, pure, unforgiving. You'd never wiped with snow before, not because you were against it, but because it hadn't happened in years. Now it was everywhere, stacked on fence posts, tucked in branches, hiding what used to be your familiar latrine path. You stepped carefully, boot crunching with each movement, and then you slipped. Flat, cold, shocked into stillness. Snow didn't care. It covered shame as easily as footprints. The first time you tried it, you didn't even mean to. You'd wandered behind the woodshed like usual. Your stomach had other plans. Urgent plans. And you'd forgotten the leaf bundle. The cloth was gone. Even your shell left by the fire warming. So you panicked, crouched, did your business, then looked around. Everything was white. Everything. You grabbed a handful, pressed it to yourself, and screamed. The cold wasn't a bite. It was a rebirth. Your entire body clenched. Your breath vanished. Your heart stopped. Your ancestors cried out in protest. Snow didn't wipe. It stole. Heat. Pride. The memory of comfort. You staggered back to your feet, limping. Not because you were hurt, but because your body refused to trust you anymore. The snow was red where it had touched you. Not blood, just broken capillaries. Or maybe a piece of your soul. You didn't tell anyone. Not at first. You acted normal. Ate your stew. Stoked the fire. But you sat differently. Sipped your tea with haunted eyes. Because snow had changed you, and you weren't sure you'd forgive it. The next morning, someone else tried it. You could tell. They moved stiffly, whispered as they walked. You exchanged glances. A nod. A shared wound. That's how it started. Soon, it became a thing. The winter wipe, they called it. Some even swore by it, said it was invigorating, clean, natural. You knew better. It was trauma in powder form. But there were benefits. No more rationing leaves. No need for shells. Even the healer admitted infections had dropped. The cold killed more than dignity. It killed germs. Maybe. No one really knew. But it sounded scientific. People got creative. They shaped snowballs in advance. Stacked them in baskets near outhouses. Some added herbs. Lavender. Mint. As if that would soften the blow. It didn't. But it distracted. One man made a mold. Pressed snow into perfect little bricks. He called them wipers. Tried selling them. They melted too fast. Nobody bought. Still, you admired his optimism. Even as he cried over slush, children weren't spared. They wiped with snow like everyone else, and their screams echoed across the valley. Mothers wept. Fathers nodded solemnly, because winter doesn't discriminate. It humbles. It educates. You developed a technique. Scoop. Hold. Wait 3 seconds. Let it warm just enough. Then press. Not too long. Not too soft. A precise science. Taught in silence. Learned through pain. You tried layering. Wrapped the snow in cloth. It helped. A little. But the cloth got wet. Frozen. Next time, it snapped in half like glass. You bled again. No one helped, because everyone else was bleeding too. They wrote songs about it. Dark, biting verses. Chanted around the fire. Snow is soft. Until it stings, it wipes away the filth of kings. You didn't sing. You just stared into the flames. Waiting for spring. But spring didn't come. Not for months. And your skin grew pale. Tough. Numb. You stopped feeling it, eventually. Not just the snow, But the shame, you accepted it, became part of it. Then one day, it melted. Fast. Gone in hours. And people cheered, laughed, ran barefoot in the mud. But you didn't celebrate. You walked quietly to the stream, sat on a rock, and looked at your hands. They were clean. Too clean. Like something was missing. You found a patch of snow in the shadows. One last remnant. You picked it up, stared at it. Then, with reverence, you wiped. Not out of need, but respect for what it had taught you, for what it had taken. Because snow didn't care. It didn't judge. It simply covered, then vanished. Like all things, like you, it was light. So light you barely felt it in your fingers. It swayed with every breeze, tried to drift away before you'd even made a decision. But you needed something. The snow was gone. The bark had grown back too thick. The rag pile now, a graveyard of threads and regrets. And there it was, a feather. Not just any feather. White. Clean. Too clean. You should have questioned that. Should have wondered where it came from. What bird had offered it? What death had allowed it to land so neatly by your doorstep? But need is louder than doubt. So you picked it up. The first time was awkward. It tickled. Not gently. Not like lovers do. No. It mocked. It slid where it wasn't meant to slide. It stirred things that had nothing to do with sanitation. You dropped it. Embarrassed. Even though no one saw. You weren't ready. But shame fades quickly when discomfort lingers. By sundown, you tried again. This time slower. Gentler. You guided the feather like a surgeon. Held your breath. And to your surprise, it worked. Not perfectly. Not completely. But enough. You washed it. Carefully. Held it under the stream like a fragile secret. Watched the water roll off the barbs, reluctant to help. Still, it came clean. Mostly. You placed it on a rock to dry, and watched it shiver. You began to trust it. Called it names in your head. Silly ones. Tender ones. Little dove. Soft whisper. Even just feather. It felt wrong to give it too much identity, but too cruel to give it none. Others saw it. One man smirked. You using bird fluff now? You didn't answer. Didn't need to. He wasn't the one waking up raw. Wasn't the one bleeding after every bark-blessed wipe. You were, and the feather understood. You learned techniques, angles, strokes. You spun it between your fingers like a paintbrush. Some days it felt like art, other days like failure. Because feathers, they bend, they give, and if you press too hard, they break. Yours didn't last long. 1 week, maybe 2. Then the shaft snapped. Mid-wipe. You froze. Half done. No plan B. You limped home, pants around your thighs, and buried it in silence. The next day, you searched. For another, a replacement. You wandered the fields, checked every coop, watched every pigeon like a predator. Feathers were there, but none like the first. None soft enough, none strong enough, none that felt right. You tried one anyway. Gray, frayed at the tip. It hurt. More than bark, more than shame. It scraped you like a promise undone. You cried. Alone, wiped with your hand. washed 3 times, still felt unclean. Then you remembered the market, 3 villages east, a merchant. She sold quills, feathers, trimmed and perfect. You traded your only pair of winter socks. She gave you 3. You held them like treasure, like knives made of kindness. Back home, you tested each. One was too stiff, one too short. But the third slid like truth. You sighed and swore loyalty. You crafted a sheath, leather, worn, hung it from your belt, kept the feathers safe, even in rain. You felt proud, innovative, almost modern, until the wind took it. One gust, one moment of distraction, gone. You searched, on hands and knees, through mud and leaves and mockery, found a pigeon's skeleton, mocked yourself, returned home empty and raw. They laughed. Of course they did. Told you not to trust birds. Try a stick next time. You nodded, smiled. But inside, you missed the feather, its silence, its precision, its refusal to judge. Eventually, you settled on grass, bundled tight, folded like paper. It worked, kinda, but it lacked soul. It lacked memory. The feather had held something no plant could match. Dignity. You started sketching, drawing feathers from memory, measuring angles, writing down softness on a scale only you understood. It became obsession. Some called it madness. But you knew the truth. Once you've wiped with grace, everything else feels like sandpaper. They say civilization begins with plumbing. You disagree. It begins with the moment a man kneels in the dirt, holds a feather to himself, and whispers, "Let this be enough." And for a while, it is. There are moments in life you never forget. Your first fall. Your first lie. The first time you looked at your own hand and thought, this is about to become something else. You didn't mean for it to happen. Nobody does. But some mornings the leaves are gone. The bark is too dry. The stream too far. And you've already squatted. Already committed. Already vulnerable. The hand is always there. Waiting. Attached. Loyal. Stupid. It doesn't ask questions. It just obeys, even when it shouldn't. At first, you tell yourself it's just once. Just this one time. You'll wash after. Really well. Soap, if you're lucky. Ash and sand, if not. Maybe even both. But you don't look at the hand right away. Not when you stand. Not when you button up. Not even when you leave the site of your shame. Because the hand knows. And now, so do you. You make it to the stream. Rub your skin raw. Up to the elbow. Because who can trust distance? The cold bites. The shame bites deeper. You hope nobody saw. They probably didn't. But you did. And the memory settles into your bones like a second skin. Later that day, someone hands you a bowl. A crust of bread. You hesitate. Look down. It's the other hand. But is it? You can't remember. You stare too long. They ask if you're okay. You lie. Say you're tired. Say nothing. Eat with wooden fingers. And taste regret in every bite. The next day, you forget. Just for a moment. You wave with that hand. Touch someone's shoulder. Scratch your chin. Then you remember, and the sickness rises behind your eyes. You excuse yourself. Wash again, but it's too late. The feeling is there now, under your nails, behind your knuckles, in the bend of your wrist, unseen, but not unfelt. People use their hands for centuries, you're told. Still do, in places. It's tradition. It's efficient. It's practical. But so is dying quietly, and no one volunteers for that. You try alternatives again, desperate ones. Rough cloth, mud, moss soaked in vinegar. None satisfy. None erase what you've done. So eventually, you go back to the hand. Not because it's best, but because it's there. You develop rituals, not just washing, more than that. Burning herbs, saying names, avoiding eye contact with your own palm. You sleep with it, curled inward, as if even your dreams shouldn't trust it. The hand becomes two things, a tool and a traitor. You use it. You resent it. Sometimes, both at once. You find yourself whispering to it, "Don't fail me. Forgive me. This is the last time." It never responds. But you swear you feel it judging. Someone in the village hears rumors. A merchant nearby, selling gloves. 1 copper each. Worn, maybe. Stained, probably. But they offer distance. You run. Trade your only belt. Get 1 glove. 1. Right hand only. The one. The one you use. It changes everything. Not because the glove protects, but because it distracts. You can pretend now. Pretend it's not you. Pretend there's a barrier. Pretend you're not an animal hunched in the woods, with 1 hand full of consequences. But gloves wear out. And this one, cheap, thin, lined with threadbare ambition, it splits on day 3, a crack across the palm. You feel the contact, through it, despite it, and the spell breaks. Again, you sit by the fire that night, hand hidden, silent. Someone cracks a joke about how the Romans used sponges, how at least they didn't use their hands. You say nothing, because you know the truth. They used what they had, and sometimes what they had was themselves. You meet a man weeks later. He's missing 3 fingers. Says a bear got them, but he smiles too easily. You wonder. He eats with his left. Never touches food with the right. It twitches sometimes, as if haunted. You nod at him. He nods back. There is a brotherhood in filth. Eventually, the hand becomes familiar. Not clean. Never clean. But understood. You know where it's been. What it's done. You respect it for staying. For not trembling. For showing up every time something better was missing. And on the coldest night, when the cloth is frozen, and the bark splinters, and you're too weak to squat for long, you whisper thank you, not because it deserves praise, but because it never asked to be chosen, and it still obeyed. The next morning, you carve a small symbol into your hut's wall, 5 lines, splayed like fingers, a quiet reminder that survival isn't always glorious. Sometimes, it's just what you do with what you can't throw away. It smelled like the ocean, not the romantic kind, not the breeze in your hair, sunset over waves kind. The real ocean, rot, salt, fish, guts, and regret. You found it in a net, drifted ashore after the storm, coiled like something sleeping or dead. You poked it with a stick. It didn't move, didn't hiss or slither. So you picked it up. It stuck to your fingers, left slime and ideas. You were desperate again. Of course you were. The cloth had molded. The sponge had frozen stiff. The feather? Long gone blown by wind or cursed by birds. And your hand? You promised yourself, never again. But promises, like leaves, disintegrate under pressure. So you looked at the seaweed and wondered. It was soft. Kind of. Wet, yes. But not sharp. Long strips, ribbon-like. Flexible. Almost gentle in its soggy way. You tore a piece. Sniffed it. Almost gagged. But survival dulls senses. You'd eaten worse. You'd used worse. Behind a dune, under gray skies, you squatted, held the seaweed like a question, and wiped. It was cold, slimy, but it worked. Slid across skin like someone whispering secrets you didn't want to hear. It didn't scrape, didn't sting. It coated, left something behind. You stood up sticky, but not sore, and that was enough. You washed in a tide pool. Let the salt sting open cuts you forgot you had. Then you went back for more, gathered a bundle, coiled it like rope, tied it with driftwood and hope. People stared as you walked back into the village, carrying kelp like a man returning from war with a banner. They asked questions. You answered with silence, because when you've been blessed by sea rot, words feel excessive. The next day, 2 others tried it. You saw them sneaking to the shore, dragging seaweed behind them like guilty priests. Later, one of them threw up. The other claimed it made him feel cleaner than ever. You didn't judge, because seaweed was like truth. It revealed more than it covered. You learned to dry it slightly, left it in the sun just enough to lose the slime. Not too crisp, just pliable, foldable, stackable. Your hut soon smelled like low tide, but your dignity returned, just a little. Then came the rash, red, spreading. You woke scratching, thought it was bugs, or curses, or guilt, but it was the seaweed. Not all of it, just a certain kind. Too green, too fresh, maybe poisonous, maybe sentient. Either way, your rear blistered like a sailor's lips. You burned that batch, screamed into the smoke, and tried again. A different type, darker, thicker. It didn't sting, but it whispered, as if the sea remembered what you'd done and didn't forgive. You started researching, as much as a man in rags could, asked old fishermen, mumbled to monks, prayed at low tide, discovered names, bladderwrack, kombu, nori, fancy words for things that stuck to your skin and clung to your shame. You learned what to avoid, what to dry, what to boil first. You became a connoisseur of filth. Soon, you had preferences, brands in your head. That one, too rough. This one smells like dead gull. But this strand, perfect, like velvet soaked in memory. You carved a rack for drying. Out of driftwood and stubbornness, hung the seaweed in neat rows, labeled each bunch with a shell. Visitors asked what it was for. You said art. They nodded, walked away confused. Better that than knowing. Winter came again, and seaweed froze, cracked like old paper. You cried. You begged the ocean for more. It ignored you, left you only foam and frost. You hoarded what you had, used smaller pieces, wiped slower, treated each strip like gold laced in algae. One day, it tore mid-wipe, left residue. You stared at your fingers, and for a moment, you missed the hand. But seaweed was better than bark, better than snow, better than dignity lost to the forest floor. It respected you in its own wet, weary way, and you respected it back. Eventually, they asked you to teach. A class, they said, about alternative sanitation. You laughed, hard, then agreed, drew diagrams in the sand, demonstrated drying techniques, even passed around samples. One man sniffed it and passed out. Another stole a strip for later. You said nothing, because now you were the seaweed prophet. You built a shrine, small, unassuming, a pile of stones and dried kelp, lit candles near it, prayed not for peace, but for cleanliness. Some nights, the tide answered, left bundles in neat curls, your offerings accepted. Years later, they wrote a song. He wiped with the sea when bark split his skin and leaves turned to dust. The ocean let him in. You blushed, but sang along, because shame had washed out with the tide. It wasn't the first thing you thought of. Not when the bark split, not when the leaves shredded, not when the cloth molded or the snow melted or the feather vanished in the wind. It was just there, rough, round, forgettable, until the day nothing else remained, and your stomach gave no warnings, only commands. You ran, not far. There was no time. Just behind the shed, behind the compost, behind hope. You squatted, groaned, prayed, and then looked around. Nothing. No moss. No bundle. No shame-friendly foliage. But there, half buried in the mud, a stone. You stared at it. It stared back, not maliciously, not kindly, just existing, as if waiting for this moment. You hesitated. You remembered your rash. The time bark drew blood, the whisper of the seaweed. You whispered back, "Don't fail me," and picked it up. It was heavier than expected, cold, unforgiving, but your options were thinner than your socks, so you wiped. The first contact was jarring, not painful, not exactly, but primal, like scraping sin off skin, like dragging the past across your body in mineral form. You flinched. It didn't care. The stone was not built for softness, only certainty. You finished, stared at it, the smear, the proof, and then, what now? You couldn't reuse it. Not like cloth, not like leaf. Couldn't burn it. It was stone, eternal. So you threw it, far, into the woods, into memory. You told yourself you'd never speak of it, but the stone changed you, your gait, your patience, your expectations. The next day, you found another one, flat, smooth, shaped like a teardrop. You kept it in your pocket, just in case. You began to notice them, everywhere, stones with potential. You ran your fingers over them like a jeweler, testing grit, testing shape. The perfect wipe was a balance of curve and edge, of polish and honesty. You tried variations. River stones too slippery, limestone too dusty, granite effective, but it made you wince. Eventually, you settled on shale. Thin, strong, with just enough give. The aristocrat of wipes, the nobleman of necessity. You carved symbols into them, not for decoration, for grip. Your hand slipped once. You don't talk about that day. No one does. You kept a collection in a pouch. People assumed they were charms. Worry stones. Talismans. In a way, they were. You worried over them. Prayed they wouldn't crack midwipe. They were sacred to you, and cursed all the same. One man asked about them. You told him the truth. He laughed. Then tried one. Stopped laughing. Started collecting. Eventually, there were whispers. Stone wipers. Grit dwellers. You were mocked in public. Respected in private. Because anyone who's used a cold stone on a darker morning knows the discipline it takes and the scars it leaves. One winter, you taught a child, not because you wanted to, but because she asked. Her cloth had gone missing. The leaves, frozen solid. She stood outside your hut, eyes wide, holding a pebble. Wrong size, wrong shape, but right question. So you showed her how to choose, how to angle, how to respect the rock. She listened, bowed after. You never spoke again. But the next day, you saw her gathering more. The community adapted. A shelf of smooth stones appeared near the outhouse, cleaned daily, rotated weekly, each marked with a notch. One use per side, no exceptions. Rules born from desperation become rituals fast. You offered to teach the town elder. He declined, said he'd stick with bark, said it built character. You nodded, but that night you left a polished stone by his door. He never thanked you, but it disappeared. So did the rash on his face. There was a festival once, a harvest celebration. You carved a stone just for it, smoothed it for hours, etched it with a cornstalk, used it that night, felt nothing but pride, then tossed it into the river. A gift, a sacrifice, a symbol of triumph in the filth. Others began decorating theirs, painted edges, carved poetry. Some even gave them names. Rough Justice, Pebble of Destiny, One, Wipe Wonder. You didn't name yours, but you knew it by feel. The weight, the promise. Then came the cracked one, a rookie mistake. Used a chipped shard, thought you could handle it, thought you were strong. You weren't. The slice was clean. The scream wasn't. They found you in the snow, pants down, bleeding into the white. You survived. Barely. But you never touched a broken stone again. After that, you became a teacher. Officially. People came to you, asked about angles, soaking time, pre-wipe rituals. You answered in grunts and gestures. Truth doesn't need full sentences, just conviction. You developed philosophy, wrote it in charcoal on your wall. The leaf forgives, the snow numbs, but the stone remembers. They laughed, then nodded, then carved it into their own walls. Truth spreads like mold quiet and undeniable. Years later, they built a monument, not for you, but for the practice, a ring of stones, polished, arranged in a circle. Each bore a mark, a name, a silent thank you. You sat beside it often, remembered your first wipe, the weight, the sting, the lesson, and you smiled, because the stone never lied. It told you what you were, and what you had left to give. It looked like salvation, thin, folded, stacked in neat little piles beside the merchant's cart. Paper, not parchment, not scroll, not the kind they wrote laws on or burned with heretics. This was soft, almost kind, whisper light. But something in you said, don't believe it. The merchant called it tissue, imported, he claimed, from the East, made by monks, refined by silence and virtue. You raised an eyebrow. You asked, what's it for? He smirked, held up 3 fingers, wiggled them near his behind. You understood, and laughed, then stopped, because the idea, it was too seductive. You thought of the bark, of the seaweed, of the hand you'd betrayed and the stone that almost betrayed you. Paper, clean, disposable, dry, but also fragile, too soft, unproven. Could it hold up? Could it handle you? You bought 1 bundle, just 1, traded 3 potatoes and a belt buckle. The merchant winked as he passed it over. Once you wipe, you never go back. You didn't believe him. You shouldn't have, but part of you wanted to. Back home, you unwrapped it like treasure, held the first sheet up to the light. It glowed, almost holy. You ran your fingers along the surface. So smooth, so perfect, too perfect. You pinched it, folded it, sniffed it, smelled like nothing, and somehow everything. You waited for the right moment, a ceremonial movement, not a casual squat, a ritual. When the time came, you laid the sheet across your thigh like armor, exhaled, then wiped. It was decent, not transcendent, not miraculous, but decent. It didn't tear immediately, didn't cling, didn't whisper. It performed, not like a lover, like a servant, efficient, quiet. You looked at it afterward, saw the mark, felt the shame, then folded it once, twice, and wiped again. That second wipe, too much. It tore. Mid-swipe, you gasped, panicked, reached for another. Used 2, then 3. The whole stack dwindled fast. You finished. Sat there, pants down, staring at the crumpled paper pile like it was the body of a fallen friend. So fragile, so necessary, and now, so gone. You washed your hands 6 times, not because of the mess, because of the fear. You'd tasted a future, one that could be bought, lost, stolen, and now you were addicted. The next day, you returned to the merchant. His cart was gone, vanished like good dreams and clean water. You cursed, loud, then softly, then to yourself. People stared. You stared back, desperate, ashamed. You scoured markets, asked around, described it. Thin, white, folded, almost sacred. Some thought you were mad. Others whispered, "We've seen it. It comes and goes. Paper finds you when you're ready." You didn't like that. You weren't looking for prophecy. You were looking for softness. You tried making your own. pounded reeds, flattened pulp, pressed it with stones. The result? Waxy, thick, cut your skin. You wept, burned the sheets, watched the ash rise like failure. A traveler passed through, carried a small roll. You recognized it instantly. Paper. Real. You begged. Offered bread, a flask, even your own sandals. He gave you a square. One. You cradled it like a newborn. Didn't use it. Just held it. Slept beside it. Let it remind you what was possible. Days turned into weeks. Then, a shipment from the coast. Boxes of it. Plain. Brown-wrapped. No merchant name. No markings. Just soft salvation stacked high. You bought as much as you could carry. More than you needed. Because with paper, enough doesn't exist. You changed your habits. Built a box to store it. Lined it with linen. Kept it near the hearth. You began folding sheets with reverence. Even trimming the edges. Presentation mattered. Even if only to you. But trust? Trust came slow. You still packed backup bark. Still kept a stone by the door. Old habits don't die. They linger. Like stains. Like memories. Then came the storm. Winds so wild they peeled roofs like fruit. Your hut shook. Screamed. You rushed to the corner. To the box. Opened it. And screamed louder. Rain had soaked the lid. Waterlogged the stack. Melted softness into sludge. You fell to your knees. Grief over toilet paper isn't dramatic. It's honest. You salvaged what you could. Dried pieces near the fire. Some hardened, others shriveled. You used them anyway. Because when softness is rare, even scraps feel like kisses. You learned. Sealed the box. Wrapped each bundle in wax cloth. Created a ledger. Tracked usage. Allowed yourself no more than 3 sheets per session. No exceptions. Even for tears. One night, you shared a sheet. Someone had nothing. You offered a square. Small. Folded. Impossibly kind. They wiped. Cried. Hugged you. That was the moment you knew. Paper was more than material. It was mercy. They began calling you keeper of the roll. You didn't correct them. Why would you? Some carry swords. You carried softness and saved souls one square at a time. It wasn't just a roll of paper. Not anymore. Not after what you'd seen, what you'd done. It was wrapped in cloth now, stored in a hollowed brick. Hidden behind a decoy wall panel no one knew how to open but you. You didn't own the roll. You watched over it, like a relic, like a secret, like your last defense against the creeping dark of the outhouse. You used other things, daily. Seaweed, moss, a shard of smooth tile that had once been a roof. But the roll, that stayed, pristine, untouched, for emergencies only. Real ones, the kind where your stomach turned inside out and screamed in Latin. It had come to you in a sack of rice, smuggled, tucked inside by someone who understood need better than most. It was white, impossibly white, like a lamb's dream, like snow that had never known footsteps. You cried the first time you unwrapped it, then rewrapped it, then cried again. You told no one, not your friends, not your neighbor with the feather collection, not even the man who'd once wiped with his own shirt and had never emotionally recovered. You told no one, because some things can't be shared. They'd be ruined, but rumors spread. They always do. Someone said they saw you walking differently. Lighter, proud. Another claimed they heard you say absorbent under your breath. You denied everything, blamed it on bread. But suspicion lingers longer than stink. They started asking questions. What was in your pouch? Why did your hut smell like pressed linen? How come you never complained about rashes anymore? You played dumb, dumber than usual. Eventually they stopped asking, but they watched. So you changed hiding spots, dug a pit beneath the firewood, set traps, marked the area with symbols known only to those who feared wiping with gravel. You stopped sleeping well, dreamed of hands reaching, fingers curling around softness that wasn't theirs. Woke up, sweating, checked the hiding spot. Still there, still sacred. You sighed in relief every time, then sighed again in dread, because one day it might not be. There were days you thought of using it. Truly, the bark was sharp, the cloth was soaked, the cold bit too deep. You'd unwrap it, hold it to your face, smell the hope, then pause, and wrap it again, because it wasn't time. Not yet, maybe never. The village fell on hard days. Supplies vanished. Fires grew colder. People began trading in strange things. One woman offered her husband's boots for a single cotton rag. Another bartered her wedding ring for a flask of vinegar to kill the itch. You said nothing. You just touched the roll through its cloth, felt its weight, its promise, and kept it hidden. Then came the thief, snuck into your hut at dawn, searched everything, the bed, the ashes, even your socks. You watched through the slats of the outhouse wall, heart pounding like a funeral drum. He got close, so close, then gave up, left. You collapsed, crawled back to the hiding spot. It was still there. You kissed the cloth. Didn't even care what else had touched it. You made a new plan. Buried it this time. Deeper. Wrapped it in waxed hide. Placed it in a carved box sealed with beeswax and shame. You mapped the location in your mind. Used a rhyme to remember. Left of the tree, where the roots rise high, dig till the soil tastes like lye. Nobody else would know what that meant, unless they were you. And you were never that cruel. Time passed. Seasons shifted. Leaves turned. Snow came. Birds left. But the roll stayed, unchanged. You visited it sometimes. Dug it up. Checked for moisture. Whispered apologies for keeping it underground. Then buried it again. It never complained, which is more than you could say for the neighbors. They started using ashes straight from the fire pit. Desperate times. Black fingers. Burned cheeks. You offered advice. Not paper. Never that. Advice. Use more moss. Soak it first. Don't press too hard. They nodded. Grateful, but suspicious. Because you never suffered. Not like them. You lied. Said you used straw. Said you built a technique. Showed them a fake bundle. It fooled them. Barely. Then came the storm. The real one. Flooded half the village. Swept away the bathhouse. Collapsed the outhouse. You ran to the tree. To the roots. Dug with your bare hands. Found the box. Still sealed. Still warm in your mind. You opened it. Held the roll high. like a torch against the chaos. And then you slipped down the hill into the stream, covered in mud and panic. You checked your hands. The roll? Gone. Swept away. Downstream. Swallowed by nature and need. You screamed, but the river didn't care. Days passed. You mourned. Ate less. Spoke less. Sat in silence with dirt under your nails and loss in your eyes. Then, a child found it. 2 miles down. Soggy, but intact. They brought it back. Said, "Is this yours?" You stared. Nodded. Then shook your head. "No," you said. "It's ours now." And you placed it in the center of the village. Built a shrine around it, lined with pine cones and polished pebbles. And a sign. For moments that matter. They never used it. Not even once. But they remembered it. And that was enough. You never meant to make a promise. Not out loud. Not officially. But there you were, kneeling in front of the shrine. Mud on your knees, hands trembling from cold and reverence. Whispering to a roll of paper wrapped in cloth and placed inside a wooden box like a relic. "I won't use you, not unless I truly must." The wind didn't answer. The paper didn't shimmer. But you felt the vow leave your mouth and bind itself to your spine. And from that day on, you kept it. The shrine stood in the middle of the village. Small. Simple. A box of pine. Some stones arranged in a circle. A cloth draped over the top to protect it from birds and bad intentions. You watched people visit. Some just stared. Others bowed. A few cried. Because everyone knew what it meant. It wasn't just about hygiene. It was about hope. People left offerings. Not to a god. To the roll. A small feather. A clean pebble. A pine cone that didn't smell too bad. Little tokens of desperation and gratitude. Someone wrote a poem. In softness lies the mercy we forgot we deserved. You didn't ask who. You didn't care. You just memorized it because it felt true. Children were told stories about the keeper of the roll, a nameless figure who once wiped like a king, but chose to suffer like the rest. They didn't know it was you. That was the point. You weren't a hero. You were just a man with sore cheeks and high standards. You started teaching again, but not about wiping techniques. No, this was deeper. A philosophy. A code. You called it the Order of the Last Square. People laughed. Then they listened. Rule 1. Never waste softness. Rule 2. Respect the rekit reminds you you're alive. Rule 3. A second wipe is a privilege, not a right. Rule 4. Always carry a backup plan. Rule 5. If you find something softer, share it. If you find nothing, suffer with dignity. They nodded. Took notes. Printed leaflets in bark, ironically. You pretended not to notice. Seasons changed. The roll remained, untouched. Until that winter, the hard one, the kind where even shadows froze. Supplies ran dry. So did patience. The outhouse collapsed again. The moss froze into sharp slabs. And bark gave splinters in places bark should never splinter. People were desperate. More desperate than ever. They came to the shrine. One by one. Asked quietly. Begged politely. Just one square? Just this once. Please? You said no. Not because you were cruel, but because you had promised. and the promise wasn't yours alone anymore. It was theirs. It belonged to everyone who'd ever wiped with snow and cried quietly afterward. You offered alternatives. Blankets to shred. Old scrolls no one read anymore. Even a pillow once used by a goat. They accepted. Reluctantly. Because in suffering, we remember who we are. Then, a child got sick. Not the usual cold. Something deeper. A rot. Caused by exposure. By damp cloth reused too many times. By hygiene turned to horror. The village murmured. You listened. You looked at the shrine. And for the first time, you considered it. You could use a single square. For the child. Cut it in half. Let them feel something, clean something, pure just, once in their short, soiled life. You walked to the shrine, hands shaking, unwrapped the cloth. The roll looked back. Still perfect. Still whole. Still waiting. You reached, paused, then stopped. Because it wasn't your decision anymore. You called the village, gathered everyone, spoke loudly, clearly. The child is sick. The paper is real. We all know what it means. So let's decide together. Silence. A long one. Someone cleared their throat. Another wept. Then, from the back, let them use it. A murmur of agreement. A few nods. Some sighs. No cheers. Because real mercy doesn't feel victorious. It feels like letting go. You broke the seal, unrolled it gently, tore off a single square, folded it, handed it to the child's mother. She bowed, whispered thank you to you, but looked at the roll when she said it. You nodded, wrapped it again, and placed it back. Now slightly smaller, but no less sacred. The child lived. Maybe because of the paper. Maybe not. But people believed. And belief, like cleanliness, spreads faster than you think. They renamed the shrine. Now it was the roll that saved a life. The offerings doubled. So did the poems. And you kept teaching. Not just how to wipe, but how to wait. Patience became a practice. Discomfort became discipline. And the roll, though lighter, became heavier with meaning. You made a new promise that night. Not to the roll, to the village, to yourself. I'll guard what's left. I'll suffer when needed. But if someone truly needs it, I'll let it go. Because mercy is a circle. Just like the roll. It was a single square. That's how it always starts. Not the full roll. Not a theft. Not vandalism. Just, one square. Quiet. Clean. Missing. You noticed it immediately. Not because you counted, but because you knew the weight. You knew the exact shape the cloth should wrap around. The tension of the knot. The way the box opened and breathed ever so slightly with the fullness of history. Now, it felt lighter. You unwrapped it, unspooled the first sheet, and there it was. A gap, like a tooth pulled from a smile. You didn't scream. That wasn't your way. You sat down, stared at the shrine, breathed, then stood up and locked the box again. But you knew. Someone had taken, without asking, without emergency. The village gathered. They saw your face. Didn't need words. Someone had broken the promise. Not the one spoken. The silent one. The one that came from days of frostbite and bark rash and moss that harbored tiny, unfriendly insects. They looked at each other, at the shrine, then at you. Do we investigate? You shook your head. No, because this wasn't about punishment. This wasn't about shame. This was about why. Why someone would break a bond older than breath just for a single moment of softness. You understood the urge. You had once stared at that same roll, felt the same temptation, but you had walked away. They hadn't. So instead of fury, you gave a speech. Nothing grand. Just truth. One square is gone. That's the choice someone made. We can't take it back, but we can choose what happens next. You saw faces fall. Some people cried. Not because they were angry, because they were scared. If one square could vanish, how many more? How fast would the roll disappear? And with it, your unity? You proposed a new rule. Each week, a volunteer would watch the roll, not guard it with weapons, but sit beside it, tend to the shrine, tell stories, not as punishment, as reminder, because memory is stronger than locks. The first volunteer was a baker. Soft hands, softer voice. She told stories of cloth that froze mid-air, of snow that became sin, of the time her brother tried using wax and still regrets it. The second volunteer was the one-legged soldier. He didn't speak, just sat, polished the wood, lit a candle, nodded at anyone who passed. The silence said more than words. A week passed. Then another. The roll stayed whole. Well, as whole as it could be. -1. But something had shifted. You could feel it. An edge. A tension. As if every breeze could become betrayal. So you started writing. Not rules. Reflections. Little notes. Folded them. Placed them under the box. Some were poems. Some were single lines. One simply said, "Mercy is measured in layers." Others followed. Soon the base of the shrine was thick with paper. Not to wipe, to remember. The irony wasn't lost on you. Then the artist came. No one knew her name. She didn't speak, but she painted, right on the side of the shrine, a mural of a hand reaching, palm open, toward a single square falling from the sky. Beneath it, a phrase, "What would you do?" It stopped people in their tracks. Children asked. Parents squirmed. And in that squirming came honesty. Confessions began. One man admitted he once wiped with a goose feather. Didn't like how it looked at him afterward. Another woman said she tried to make paper from flower petals. Didn't go well. One square dissolved mid-use. You all winced together, because pain shared is pain lessened. Still, you didn't know who took the square, until one morning, a square reappeared, placed gently atop the box, clean, crisp, but different, not from the roll, homemade, imperfect, rough edges, but folded with such care. You knew someone was sorry. You didn't ask who, didn't want to know, because what mattered wasn't the theft, it was the return, the gesture. It said more than any apology. It said, "I remember what this means." You left it there, next to the real roll, didn't remove it, didn't hide it, let others see. Some laughed, some nodded. A child tried to draw on it. You stopped them gently. That square was once a mistake. Now it's a lesson. From then on, people started adding their own squares. not to replace the roll, to honor it. They made paper from bark, leaves, even silk scraps, placed one sheet each, wrote notes on them, sometimes poems, sometimes questions. One said, "Would you suffer so others don't have to?" Another simply asked, "Do you remember the first time you wiped?" You did. Everyone did. You just don't talk about it. The shrine evolved, no longer just a shelter for the roll. Now it was a library, a confession booth, a museum of mercy. Some came just to read, others to add. You watched, smiled, not because you forgave the one who broke the circle, but because they helped make it wider. One square had gone missing, but 50 more were born, made by hand, by hope, by people who knew that wiping was never just wiping. It was a declaration. I deserve softness. And you stood back. Let them kneel. Let them place their imperfect sheets with trembling hands. Because the roll may be sacred, but the act of caring, that's holy. You'd always wondered what the day would look like. The day it would happen. The day when someone would break the glass, lift the box, and reach past reverence and restraint. To use it, not talk about it, not bow to it. Use it. You had prepared for it, in theory, drawn up ceremonies, designed speeches in your mind. But when the day actually came, it arrived without warning, without trumpet, without vote, just one man, one emergency, and one decision. He came stumbling into the village square, clutching his stomach like it was about to betray him to the gods. Face pale, sweat clinging to every crevice. The walk was not noble. It was desperate. A shuffle, a quake, a surrender. People turned, watched. No one asked what was wrong, because the body has one language in those moments, and it speaks clearly. He didn't go to the outhouse, didn't go behind the tree. He walked straight to the shrine, knees buckled, and with a sound between a sob and a grunt, he opened the box. You saw it from across the square, the sound of wood scraping stone. You froze, dropped the loaf of bread in your hand, ran. He was unrolling it, clumsily, with fingers that shook. One sheet, two. He reached for a third. You caught his hand, held it. He looked at you with eyes full of fear. Please, just one word. But it said everything. You nodded, let go, stepped back. So did the others. The whole village stood in silence as the man ripped 3 sheets, held them like they were ancient relics, then stumbled behind the nearest wall and vanished. The silence stayed. No one moved. Not for a full minute. Then someone whispered, "Is it over?" But it wasn't. Because when he returned in tears. Not from shame, from relief. He bowed, held the 3 used sheets folded in his palm like crumpled prayers. Of course, he didn't keep them. You had rules about that. He burned them in the ceremonial pit with dried lavender. Smoke rose gently, smelled faintly of honesty. No one applauded. No one cheered. But something changed that day. The roll? It had been used, not as an idea, as a tool, and that made it realer than ever. People approached you, asked what came next. Do we add to it again? Do we seal it up for good? Do we call it retired? You didn't answer right away. You sat by the shrine, watched the roll, lighter by 3, still full, still folded perfectly, but different, like a knight who had drawn their sword for the first time. That night, you held a gathering. Everyone came, even those who never wiped with anything but snow and sarcasm. You stood beside the shrine. No podium, no fire, just a roll. And the truth, we saw mercy today, and we saw why we wait. The roll was made to be used, but not wasted. You paused, looked around. Faces. So many faces. Young, old, wounded, all waiting. From now on, the shrine will not just store the roll, it will dispense it. Gasps. Some in horror, some in awe. 1 square per week. For those who need it. No questions. No shame. You thought they'd resist. Instead, they clapped. Slowly. Then faster. A rhythm of approval. Not celebration. Acknowledgement. The roll became a ritual. Every Sunday, at sunrise, you unwrapped it, ripped 1 sheet, hung it gently on a small hook. A bell rang. The square swayed in the wind like a flag of surrender and salvation. Sometimes it went untouched. Sometimes someone took it. You never asked who. That was the point. Softness by trust. The artist returned. Painted a second mural, this time of a hand letting go, with a square fluttering down to another palm. The caption, "Grace shared is grace multiplied." Children started sketching rolls in the dirt. Teens wove squares from reeds, just for fun. One man carved a miniature shrine out of bone. A woman composed a song called 3 Squares and a Dream. You wept when she sang it, quietly. In the back, you began to realize something. It was never about the paper. It was about the weight. The weight, the dignity in discomfort. The choice to endure so someone else doesn't have to. The man who had used the square that day, he came to you one evening, held out a bundle wrapped in cloth, unfolded it. Inside, 3 squares of hand-pressed paper, not as soft, but strong. He had made them, by hand. "I want to give back," he said. "I owed the roll. Now I've paid it forward." You nodded, accepted the sheets, added them to the offering box. The shrine didn't grow smaller. It grew wider. And you finally understood. Mercy is not preserved. It is practiced. And every square, used with kindness, is one more piece of a circle, unbroken. No one called it the end. Not out loud, but it lingered. In the air. In the way people moved. In the softness of their voices around the shrine. Something was changing. The world was warming. The rains had returned. Trade had reopened. Cloth came back into fashion. So did paper. Actual paper. Not handmade. Not bark-wrapped agony. The real kind. With pulp. With sheets. At first, no one noticed. They were too busy celebrating clean water, new walls, bread with crusts. But then someone mentioned it casually at the weekly square hanging. "Hey, we don't really need this anymore, do we?" No one answered. But you saw the way they looked at the roll. Not with longing. With guilt. The shrine still stood. But it felt like a museum now. A relic of a time they'd rather not remember. You sat there often, alone, watching the wind ripple through the fabric draped over the wooden box. It didn't sing to you anymore. It just rustled, like a sigh, too tired to finish. The artist came again, painted a 3rd mural. This time, an open palm, empty. No square. just light. Caption: to let go is not to forget. You held a meeting. Not mandatory. Not dramatic. Just a gathering. Same people. Same circle. This time older. Wiser. Less raw. More reflective. You stood beside the box. Unwrapped it. Held the roll high. Its weight had changed. Used, but not diminished. Like a candle that had burned slowly. Patiently. For years. You placed it down and spoke. There was a time when this was the only softness we had. A time when we begged for bark. When ash was luxury. When one square could make or break a man's soul. We made promises to this roll and to each other, and we kept them, but the time has come to let it rest. Gasps. Some tears. One child whispered, "Are we burying it?" You smiled. No, we're giving it what it always gave us. A clean goodbye. You built a platform. Simple wood. Hung a banner. The final flush. Not literal, of course. No one had plumbing yet. But it was symbolic. You invited everyone to bring an offering. Not to add to the roll. To honor it. A pine cone. A shell. A note folded like a memory. You read some aloud. One said, "You taught me patience." Another, "I used moss for 2 years and didn't scream." That's your legacy. The last, "I wiped. I survived. I shared." Then you took the roll. Still soft. Still white, though now tinged with the brown of time and touch. And you did what no one thought you'd do. You unrolled it. All of it. Across the platform. Let it stretch. Breathe. Flow. Like a river of relief. It shimmered in the sunlight. People gasped. Laughed. Cried. Someone tried to step on it. You glared. They backed away. Respect returned. Then came the final moment. A small flame. A slow burn. You didn't toss it in all at once. You let it feed the fire, sheet by sheet. Folded each with care. Whispered old rules like prayers. Never waste softness. Suffer with dignity. Mercy is measured in layers. And when it was done, ash remained. Not dirty. Sacred. You bottled it in a small jar. Placed it in the shrine. Next to a carving that simply read, "We wiped. We wept. We healed." And the shrine? It stayed. But now, it held stories. Offerings continued. Not of paper. Of gratitude. Of jokes. Of poems. Of drawings by children who had never wiped with pine cones and never would. You called that victory. Years passed. The shrine aged. So did you. But every once in a while, someone still visited. Lit a candle. Left a folded note. Not to ask for squares. To thank the idea of them. Because softness, it's not just for the body. It's for the heart. The soul. The scarred hands that held on when everything else slipped away. One day, a traveler came. Young. Curious. Looked at the shrine. Asked, "What was this for?" You smiled. Knelt beside him. Whispered the truth. This is where we remembered how to care for each other, even when everything hurt. He didn't get it. Not yet. But he nodded, and promised to return. And as the wind blew softly through the empty wooden box, you knew the story wasn't over. It just didn't need to be written in paper anymore. Now it lived in people.